Okay, we are now live. We will get started at exactly 5 p.m. So just hold tight for 3 more minutes.
Hey, Alvin, this is Desiree. If you click on participants, you can see
Right.
the full name of the person and their titles.
Oh yeah, no. I think Mrs. Burbeck was talking about the folks that are watching through the live stream.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I can't see it. I can't see her full one either. But if I click on participants, I
Right.
can see the full one there, but not on the screen.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, we'll begin. Thank you everyone for attending and making out today. I know it is the day before, I know it's still technically the last day of winter break, so appreciate all of these wonderful community stakeholders and community advocates taking their time and clearing an hour and a half on their Sunday to come out. So on behalf of the students, we really appreciate your support. So without further ado, we'll get right to it. Welcome to the GENup Fremont Mental Health Town Hall, completely student run, student driven, and student organized. To get started, we're going to go over some community guidelines of what to expect for today. One, we want to remain respectful and open-minded. Make sure to recognize and respect each other's feelings, background, and cultural differences. Two, please remain on mute unless you are speaking. Three, during the open discussion period, raise hands if you want to say something in the discussion, and our moderators will call on you to speak. Four, for the discussion, participants will be allowed to make one follow-up to their questions. And five, moderators will follow stack in discussion to encourage wide participation. Moderators will also prioritize folks who haven't spoken yet, or members directly impacted by the current topic that's being discussed. Special thanks to the FUSD Alumni Association for really helping us be a strong adult ally and helping us organize and put this together. If you are a current FUSD alumni, you can join the FUSD-alum-association at googlegroups.com to get signed into the Alumni Google Groups channel. I'm also going to give a special thanks to the mental health experts and educators who have today really been crucial adult allies in really helping the students prepare these mental health recommendations and suggestions. We have Jasmine, Glynis, Lakshmi, Katie, Jenny, Samantha, and Tony. So big thanks to all of you as well. So to get right started, the presenters today, we have GENup Fremont, we have the mental health professionals, both FUSD and non-FUSD. We have ASB presidents, FUSD Alumni Association representatives, labor representatives, our superintendent, our school board members, our state assembly member, our city council member, and PTA presidents. So I'm going to be going over a quick introduction and list of all the folks that are here today. I'm going to move on to gallery view. There we go. So we can see everyone's awesome faces and smiling faces over Zoom. We have Lakshmi, Jasmine, Glynis, Reva, Katie, and Jenny, who are all the FUSD educators and mental health professionals that we will presenting today. We have all of the 5 high school ASB presidents. So if y'all want to wave real quick, we have Shelby, we have Ethan, so I'll say the schools, my bad. We have Shelby from John F. Kennedy, we have Ethan from Irvington High School, we have Ian from Mission San Jose High School, we have Abby from Washington High School, and we have Bella from American High School. We have a couple of PTA presidents here. Let's begin with Vanita, who's the FUPTA Fremont Council PTA president. We have Mr. Rashid, who's the MSJ Mission Possible PTO president. We have Priya, the American High School PTA president. We have Gordon, the Washington High School PTA president, and we have Nita, the Irvington High School PTA president. We have our newly elected Assembly member, Alex Lee, here present today as well. We have City Council member Teresa Kang. We have school board member and trustee Campbell, and we have trustee Prasad here today representing the school board as well. We also have the student.
You went on mute. Okay.
I'm so sorry. Where did I cut off? I just got muted for a second. What was the last thing I said?
I think you said trustee Prashad.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'm so sorry. That was anticlimactic. Let me go through that cycle again. But I was introducing, we have Trustee Campbell and Trustee Prasad representing the Board of Education here today. We have Trustee Khan, the student member on the school board. We have Mrs. Burbeck, the president of FUTA here today. We have Mr. Bailey from the district. We have Superintendent Kamek from the district as well. And we have former trustee Burke and educator Mrs. Burke, and we also have Mr. Evans, the MSJ principal. We have Mrs. Melby from Irvington High School, and yeah, that's the slate we have today. From then on, we're kind of going to get started to the presentational piece. The agenda today is, again, we're going to spend 20 minutes giving a presentation and providing background on the different recommendations and strategies we're ultimately going to be providing, and then students will be presenting these student-driven proposals. From there, we're going to move into breakout groups where the different stakeholders are going to have an opportunity to discuss these student-made recommendations, and from there, everyone will have a chance to kind of share out their recommendations. From there, we're going to open it up to open discussion, and then concluding it with tangible summaries and action items for next steps. So to begin, I'm now going to pass it over to our presenters here today to give a presentation on mental health and the background on the strategies. So to begin, we want to provide some background first on FUSD mental health data. So I'll pass it off to the students and they can take it away.
Yeah, so in our mental health data, we found that in the most recent California Healthy Kids survey from the 2018 to 2019 school year, around 1,000 11th graders, which was 38%, and around 700 ninth graders, which was 27%, experienced chronic sadness or hopelessness in the past 12 months. Additionally, around 500 11th graders, which was 19%, and around 400 ninth graders, which was 15%, have seriously considered suicide in the past 12 months. In the 2018 to 2019 school year, FUSD had 30 cases of students experiencing a mental health crisis, which led to 72-hour psychiatric hospitalizations. FUSD had 20 such cases in 2019 to 2020.
So in 2019, Dr. Stuart Slavin, a pediatrician and a professor at the St. Louis University School of Medicine, conducted an anonymous survey of Irvington High School students. And what he found was that 61% of students showed moderate to severe symptoms of depression, and 85% of students suffered moderate to severe symptoms of anxiety. And the district has lost at least 2 students to suicide at a single school site from 2013 to 2017.
And the district falls far below recommended student to staff ratios. The American School Counselor Association recommends a ratio of 1 school counselor to 250 students, whilst FUSD has a ratio of 1 to 710. The National Association of School Psychologists recommends 1 school psychologist to 500 and 700 students, and FUSD has a ratio of 1 to 1,400. The American Nurses Association recommends a ratio of 1 school nurse to 750 students, and FUSD has 1 to 2,920 students. Finally, the California Teacher Association's American Speech and Language Associations recommended an individual caseload cap of 40 for speech and language therapists, and FUSD has an average caseload of 55.
We're now going to pass it on to the mental health professionals and educators to begin discussing these strategies for supporting mental health well-being.
Thank you so much, Alvin and students. So many of you have heard about the term MTSS. It stands for Multi-Tiered System of Support and is a model that has been adopted by the California Department of Education. As you see, its focus is on 3 core areas: academic, behavior, and social emotional learning, with the whole child approach, which we will go into further detail in this presentation. At its core, MTSS provides a set of systems, structures, and practices to build a positive, equitable, and inclusive learning environments for each student. However, we must be very intentional about equitable educational equity and cultural consideration, and take the time with our most vulnerable students to make sure that they have equitable and inclusive access to education. This framework can be truly transformative as it challenges us to change the ways in which we have worked in and outside of the classroom, as it can become extremely impactful when we adopt initiatives, systems, and supports such as universal design for learning, culturally linguistic and relevant instruction, as well as a real focus and investment on Tier 2 interventions, such as dyslexia interventions, that not only help to prevent reading difficulties, but also help to support students' self-esteem and confidence. We will now move into the various supports and structures that MTSS has to offer. The first area is academic MTSS.
Before diving into the academic aspect of MTSS, I wanted to talk about youth that get left behind in the margins. We use the word disabled and persons with disabilities, respecting groups who would like identity first language and others who prefer person first language. If we center disabled youth of color as experts, that means that we acknowledge their expertise in their own experiences, capable of articulating the ways inequities impact their lives. We can acknowledge them as scholars capable of far more than the system currently allows. Impairments such as blindness, autism, orthopedic issues can have physical or neurological effects, but disability is what society creates as barriers as a result of the impairment, leading to segregating them into lower tier environments. When we actively work to accommodate and mitigate people's impairments, impairment becomes less significant and disabled people are not excluded from learning.
This means that we are very aware of the tendency to consider Tier 3 interventions within MTSS as segregated special education. And we want to emphasize that special education is a service and not a place. And how special education, as it is often currently practiced in FUSD, often functions as another way to exclude students of color with disabilities. Tier 3 is not special education as we currently enact it, but a level of support that is intensive that some students with disabilities may require.
In K-12 settings, special education becomes the grounds where segregation of Black and Brown students happens, leading to the school-to-prison pipeline. If you are outside of the norm, who you are is questioned and your rights terminated. Non-white bodies and minds have always been linked with systems of deficit. Only certain ways of learning are equated with being smart. This cartoon exemplifies what universal design for learning can do. I call it the curb cut effect. In this cartoon, you see a group of kids waiting for the janitor to finish shoveling the snow on the stairs so they can get to the classroom. The disabled child in the wheelchair asks the janitor to shovel the ramp, to which he responds, "All the other kids are waiting for me to shovel the stairs. Once I finish that, I will shovel the ramp for you." To which the student replies, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." This illustrates how the access points we build for students with disabilities is of benefit to all students. UDL is based on theoretical principles that address the variability in our student population. The goal of UDL is to help all students become expert learners with the understanding that they are like fingerprints, each individual unique and varied. An assumption that UDL operates on is that students are not one-dimensional from struggling to gifted. They vary on language, background knowledge, interests, memory, attention, to name a few. Engage with me on a thought experiment. If the whole point of schooling was to teach every student how to run, but we only provide them with size 8 shoes, who do you think is going to be the most successful? Using UDL, we can provide multiple ways in which we can engage learners, represent the learning, and have multiple means of action and expression. This is how we accommodate the multidimensionality of people, provide context that can support different learners, and provide multiple pathways for different students within the same school system. The key aspect is student choice and agency, to allow disabled students of color to tell us how they learn best and to create general education classrooms in which it can happen.
As we consider MTSS, I wanted to spend a little time discussing dyslexia, as it's estimated to impact a great number of students. Dyslexia involves student struggles with learning to read. Key areas of challenge include identifying speech sounds and understanding sound symbol relationships. It also impacts the area of the brain that processes language. The Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity estimates that dyslexia impacts 20% of the general population. And for students who are already identified with a learning disability, the center estimates that 80 to 90% of these students struggle with some form of a reading disorder. Currently, approximately 3,600 FUSD students receive special education services. And based on the Yale estimate, this translates to about 3,000 students who may be impacted by a reading disorder or dyslexia. As we know, students first learn to read and then read to learn. But when students struggle with establishing foundational reading skills, it can significantly impact their fluency. And as a result, their comprehension and understanding of text suffers. Reading disorders significantly impact a student's academic career and ultimately their lifelong learning. Further, students with reading disorders such as dyslexia may experience frustration, have a poor self-image, and dislike school, and ultimately check out of their learning. Many education experts agree that the most effective approach to teaching students with dyslexia is using something called multi-sensory structured language, or MSLE. MSLE is based on the Orton-Gillingham, or sometimes I refer to it as the OG approach, which dates back almost 100 years and is based on a body of time-tested knowledge, practice, and scientific evidence about how students learn to read and write. The OG approach is a direct, explicit, multisensory, structured, sequential, diagnostic, and prescriptive way to teach reading and writing to those with dyslexia and reading disorders. Given that dyslexia is estimated to impact such a large percentage of students with LDs, or learning disabilities, it is recommended that FUSD consider adopting and implementing a curriculum to address such disorders. Currently, there are some special education teachers within FUSD who use an OG-based program called Sunday Systems. District-wide adoption and implementation of an OG-based curriculum could address reading issues earlier and possibly reduce the number of students recommended for special education evaluations. As well, a targeted approach to addressing dyslexia and other reading disorders may further benefit disproportionately impacted student groups.
We'll now move on to the behavioral portion of MTSS.
So thinking about behavior within an MTSS model requires a cultural shift from a punitive reactionary practice to positive, preventative, and supportive practices. This requires a shift from the person in authority, who's usually the teacher or an administrator, presenting a list of rules of what students cannot do, but instead collaborating within the school community and including students to build expectations for how we will all interact together. Tier 1 would include those school-wide positive expectations, as well as classroom-specific expectations. And these expectations should really be community-created and site-specific. And this is something that some sites don't currently have. Tier 1 would also include other supports for all students, including active roles from all staff on campus to build positive relationships with all students and not just the students assigned to them. And also establishing and maintaining healthy learning environments, which would include ongoing mental health support, adequate break and playtime, access to healthy meals for all students, mindfulness practices, and other stress reduction techniques. Then we could move on to a tier 2, which would consist of supports provided to small groups of students. This can include a system called check-in and check-out, where a student chooses an adult that's not their teacher to check in with every morning and check out with every afternoon, as a way to be sure that that child starts and ends their day with a positive interaction. Tier 3 would be any individualized support, which may include a support plan for a student and staff, as well as increased collaboration with other agencies to be sure that the needs of that child are being met. And students may move to a higher tier of support in different ways, which may include teacher referral, student self-referral, parent concern, or any other identified need. But the key is to have many different positive supports to continually build a student's community rather than punishing and alienating students from their school community, which is detrimental to the success of our students and primarily to our disabled students of color who are more likely to experience negative consequences from discipline policies, including suspension and expulsion.
In summary, what really needs to occur across the district is a shift towards actions and systems that promote a stronger sense of community in which all members feel welcome and supported. This will help build an environment of mutual understanding and respect. This will not be achieved by purchasing of curricula or instating a one-time training, but requires a total culture shift that prioritizes care.
As we are developing our behavioral interventions and brainstorming how we are shifting FUSD's culture, we want to emphasize the need for a trauma-informed framework in our teaching and mental health practices. Trauma-informed practices are designed to transform our schools in ways that prevent students from being traumatized or re-traumatized in schooling and counseling, while simultaneously supporting students who have experienced extraordinary trauma and interrupted learning in integrating into the school community and developing agency. This paradigm, which is drawn from the scholarly work of Alex Vinet and Dulce Marie Flecha, is based on the understanding that our schools as they are often quite traumatic places for our young people, particularly given the ways that racism, queerphobia, and many other oppressions play out in our schools. It is also based on the assumption that many students, especially foster youth, refugees, and immigrant youth, have experienced severe and traumatizing disruptions to their learning and are then pushed out of school because of their trauma rather than supported and cared for. Thus, instead of advocating for specific best practices, we encourage educators and the district to inquire themselves into the current state of our schools and determine what shifts would be best for each particular space to support traumatized students and prevent trauma from happening. We can ask ourselves questions like, what practices in our schools, and especially classrooms, cause trauma? And how are they linked to other forms of oppression in our society? We also might ask, do we funnel students who've experienced trauma and disruptions to their learning out of the school community? Do we outsource them to various other spaces like troubled teen programs, for example? Do we allow our students to set boundaries? What culturally relevant coping mechanisms can we teach our students to prevent trauma and promote healing? Because trauma is a response, not an event, right? These last two are extremely important because Our work is not just in halting the harm that happens to traumatized students in our classrooms, but also to promote healing, agency, and community for our children through positive supports, and especially for children of color and disabled children of color, to help them access the different socio-emotional skills their ancestors and communities have cultivated for generations to cope with pain and loss, and to thrive in FPSD schools.
Now we will move on to the social emotional aspect of MTSS.
Social and emotional learning, also known as SEL, is the process through which children and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop emotional awareness and healthy identities, or self-awareness, manage emotions and stress and achieve goals, or self-management, feel and show empathy for others, or social awareness, establish and maintain supportive relationships and effectively navigate conflict when it arises, and make responsible, caring, and ethical decisions. Ultimately, SEL skills are foundational for students learning and thriving. A student under mental duress can't learn effectively. A student without tools to vocalize their needs won't be able to advocate for themselves. How a student feels fuels their behavior. And when a child behaves in challenging ways, they're not a child in need of punishment, but rather a child in need of help. They need help with learning how to identify their feelings, learning how to communicate these feelings and their needs to their support system, and learning how to cope with these emotions in healthy and productive ways. When we leverage SEL, we can reduce the potential of student behavior being deemed as disruptive or challenging, and instead create communities where all students feel connected and are able to navigate life's ups and downs with resilience. And the research on SEL is profound. CASEL, or the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning, has consolidated hundreds of studies and decades of research. And it's clear that with SEL, we see significant improvements in students' social and emotional skills, attitudes towards themselves, school, and others, relationships and pro-social behaviors, perceptions of classroom and school climate, and academic achievement. We also see significant declines in students' anxiety and mood disorders, behavior problems, and substance use. And it's even a wise financial choice. For every $1 invested in SEL, we see an $11 return on investment, including things like higher lifetime earnings, improved physical and mental health, and reduced crime. It's truly transformative for students, schools, and society for the long haul. And while SEL can fortunately be taught and practiced, any SEL that students receive in Fremont Unified currently is up to individual educators. This means that SEL is not currently guaranteed to all students, and the quality and content of these SEL lessons are going to vary widely across the district at this point. Plus, when educators are tasked to find or create resources on their own, it adds yet another to-do on an already overflowing list of responsibilities. On the other side of the equation, and what our hope is that when districts invest in comprehensive SEL resources and therefore center the whole child, the whole educator, and the whole school system, true transformation is possible, leading to the kind of educational equity and excellence that the students and community deserve. And in fact, this forum is an example of how SEL is helping to advance equity and empower young people and adults to co-create Fremont schools that help ensure that this community is safe, healthy, and socially just.
Studies focused on school safety find that when schools approach discipline through responsive, reintegrative, and restorative mechanisms, they are more effective at maintaining safe communities. Policies that focus on repairing the harm, establishing accountability, and developing a strong school community have been found to prevent further actions. Restorative practices use tiers of intervention. Tier 1 circles are meant for community building, and this tier engages all students. Tier 1 focuses on using social emotional skills and classroom circles to build relationships, create shared values and guidelines, and promote restorative conversations. Tier 2 circles are used for intervention and repair. Tier 2 focuses on using non-punitive responses to harm or conflict to respond to disciplinary issues in a restorative manner. Tier 3 is used to provide one-on-one guidance to support the reentry of youth following suspension, truancy, or expulsion. We hope that the district can reevaluate its implementation of restorative practices. The district pays for a select group of staff to receive restorative practice training from IIRP, but currently that is not widely used. It's not clearly outlined how to staff how or when to use it. What we found from looking into other school districts is that implementing restorative practices effectively is less about the money we spend on trainings and more about taking substantial steps to create a larger cultural shift in this district.
Hold on. We want to turn our attention to the necessity of culturally responsive practice, community schooling, and wraparound services as the heart of our vision for MTSS. In FUSD, we currently have a double problem. On one hand, there's a severe cultural mismatch between the embedded values of how FUSD runs its schools and Fremont's communities of color, who make up the majority of our students, by far. Consider all the ways that curriculum and teaching practices forced students of color to assimilate into whiteness, abandoning heritage languages and leaving any cultural wealth and knowledge they have at the door. On the other hand, there's also the problem of the model minority, a stereotype about Asian Americans that encourages FUSD's educators to see the Fremont community as a monolith of cruel, hyper-competitive parents who want their kids buried under mountains of homework and forced to assimilate into whiteness. The model minority erases all of the cultural wealth our Asian, Black, and Latinx communities bring to the table, and also the families who want liberatory education and mental health support for all of our children, replacing us and our community with a racist Orientalist stereotype which can justify FUSD's more brutal practices. In these twin problems, the cultural mismatch between FUSD and the community it serves and the racist model minority leads to significant mental health problems and learning loss for our students. Educator Zaretta Hammond and psychologist David Eng describe how the forced assimilation that happens in FUSD affects adolescents' mental health, leading to a constant state of anxiety during time in school, dissociation, mental illness, and severe losses in learning, and especially in critical thinking. Any mental health support that is not culturally responsive and does not value our community will not do much at all to solve the heart of the problem caused by the mismatch in culture and the model minority. So what is to be done? We can see a model for how to build the power of our communities of color in the model of community schooling. Within a community schooling model, educators and families work together every step of the way to democratically run schools, creating structures for schools to be accountable to the communities of color they are supposed to serve. And additionally, with a model of wraparound services, the school becomes a place for the community to come together to solve the problems it faces, creating together the mental health support, tutoring, childcare, and food services designed to meet the specific needs of families in the community and value the cultural wealth and knowledge the community brings, all with the intention of explicitly supporting those who are most vulnerable, particularly working class students, Black and Latinx students, and LGBT students. In a community school, we work together to imagine and create anti-racist, anti-oppressive education for our children, disrupting whiteness and the model minority, and supporting everybody. So as we're doing this, of course, it is also important that all of us become aware and understand the subtle and deep-seated values in our educational beliefs and practices. When we become aware of our embedded values and the values of our community, we can begin to actually work together to create liberatory education for our children.
Thank you so much to all the students and the educators and the mental health professionals for that wonderful presentation. We're now going to be moving into the recommendations piece, and these are all student devised recommendations with a lot of support and adult allyship, and as well as consultation with many different community stakeholders, as well as mental health professionals and experts. We'd also like to give a shout out to all the students who helped put together these recommendations, or as well as helped organize today's town hall from a cross section of all of 5 of FUSD's high schools. We have Andrea, Drishti, Bella, Benjamin, Ashwarya, Amelia, Coven, Kenneth, Tushar, and Priya and Rosamond as adult allies. So thank you all for helping make today possible. So without further ado, we're going to jump into the student created and student made recommendations and proposals that we believe that FUSD can take to better address systemic mental health issues in our district. I'll first pass it on. So yeah, go for it.
All right. So some of the existing measures that are in place right now are that all high schools are going to be having wellness centers pretty soon, as they're in construction right now. And most secondary sites have youth and family service health choice interns, in addition to their school counselors. Also, most secondary sites have peer resource, and we also have late start days and stress less days at the secondary level. We also have the hiring of an additional school psychologist that was approved on December 16th, and that brings us to 32 in total. And the CCEIS plan is being introduced to the district and will implement some MTSS elements at elementary and middle school sites as well. Each site also has a team called the Coordination of Services Team, or the COS team, where teams of educators at each site meet in an attempt to connect students to needed resources. And also some staff received one-time restorative training practice trainings. And currently there are 7 elementary sites implementing a framework called PBIS, which stands for Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports, which has some overlap with the behavioral MTSS that we talked about earlier. And finally, as great as these initiatives are, there is not consistency at the district level to ensure that every student at every site has access to the support they need. And it's important that the district as a whole prioritizes the wellness of every student by ensuring equitable distribution of the services provided.
So we're going to jump into some of these recommendations. Step 1, hiring staff and training. So the district should hire staff to gradually meet the professionally recommended ratios for counselors, school psychologists, nurses, behaviorists, speech language pathologists, social workers, paraprofessionals, as discussed in the beginning of that slide's presentation, as well as negotiating new bargaining agreements based on these required ratios. The district should also actively recruit a diverse pool of staff from historically Black colleges and universities, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institutions, as well as Hispanic serving institutions for these roles. All FUSD personnel, starting with mental health professionals, should also receive training in cultural competency and reciprocity. And all mental health professionals and administrators should also receive 12 to 14 hours of training from the Crisis Prevention Institute. And this training should become mandated for all school site administrators as well.
Step 2 will be to develop a district-wide plan for proper implementation of the following frameworks with progress monitoring and data-based instructional decisions. This implementation plan should be based on California Department of Education guidelines, and we will be implementing the multi-tiered systems of support, or the MTSS guidelines that's discussed earlier. So we're going to be implementing 3 different types of MTSS: academic, behavioral, and social and emotional. So within academic MTSS, we plan on implementing evidence-based dyslexia intervention and universal design for learning, or UDL. Within behavioral MTSS, we talked about culturally responsive intervention systems, trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed support. And within social emotional MTSS, restorative practices and restorative justice, social emotional learning, or SEL, and cultural responsiveness and community schools.
In step 3, we'd focus on student, parent, and community engagement. We'd implement student education initiatives for all K-12 students at all school sites, including year-round education on mental health awareness and healthy coping strategies, social emotional learning curriculum, peer counseling and conflict resolution training, and cultural competency and cultural humility training for students. Additionally, we develop on-site and virtual wellness centers for the junior high/middle and high schools in each attendance area. We'd further expand partnerships with local and regional mental health agencies to broaden support for all students.
So continuing from step 3, we plan on implementing parent and community educational initiatives that are accessible to English as a second language speakers. So these are including bicultural parenting workshops and workshops on destigmatizing mental health. So also to make mental health literacy more accessible to ESL speakers, mental health information should be posted online and available in the following languages: Spanish, Hindi, Mandarin, and Tagalog.
Okay, so step 4 is all about informed decision-making and benchmarks. So here we are recommending that the district create district-wide mental health teams that are facilitated by mental health professionals. So these teams should be compensated for their efforts, have clearly defined goals and expectations, and report to the board on a quarterly basis. So 3 main pillars of that plan. 1, district leadership mental health professional liaison team, which would review school policies and procedures related to mental health and special education and develop implementation plans as needed. So 2 is the MTSS implementation team that is broken down into 3 sub-teams. So the first one would be the academic sub-team, which implements Universal Design for Learning, UDL, and evidence-based dyslexia intervention. 2 is behavior sub-team, which would implement restorative practices and culturally responsive interventions. And step 3 would be social emotional subteam, which would be charged with implementing social emotional learning, or SEL, curriculum, mental health awareness education, and community schools. And step 3 of all of this would be the disability rights advisory team, which would be charged with reviewing policies and disciplinary procedures that systematically affect the educational outcomes of students with disabilities. And this team should include members of the Special Education Parent Teachers Association, or SEPTA, and the Special Education Community Advisory Committee, or CAC.
The final part of our recommendations continuing on informed decision-making and benchmarks is first, creating a universal, indicated, and selective benchmarks to assess the implementation of existing and future mental health programs. And part of this includes reporting these benchmarks to both the school board and community at large on a quarterly basis. Second, bolstering the wellness committee, including alumni seats, creating actionable goals, increasing community access and input, and presenting regularly to the board. And third and finally, working with the city of Fremont to support a parcel tax and collaborate on community education initiatives to inform people on the need for mental health services. And part of that includes working with stakeholder groups to campaign for the parcel tax.
So now, after kind of sharing and discussing these recommendations, we'd all like to bring together the district stakeholders for a productive conversation on this. Now, there are obviously quite a lot of us gathered here today. So we're going to take a different approach to make this discussion as effective as possible. We've broken off everyone into 6 different breakout rooms. And in these breakout rooms, we're going to have a student facilitator. And you're going to kind of spend the next 5 to 10 minutes discussing some of these recommendations, as well as kind of maybe what each district stakeholder can do to potentially implement or move forward and take some tangible steps to address some of these recommendations that were brought up. From there, we're going to bring everyone back for 10 minutes, and then each group is going to choose 1 to 2 people to kind of share what was discussed, what they talked about. And after each of the 6 groups go, we're then going to open it up to kind of open discussion where anyone will have the opportunity to jump in. So without further ado, for the audience that is watching, I guess that would be a short 10-minute intermission for you. So go do what you have to do, and we will all be back in 10 minutes. So Priya, if you could start moving folks into the breakout rooms.
They should be open now.
Okay, perfect. Hey everyone, welcome back. Most folks are still in their breakout rooms. They have about 25 seconds to leave it, so we'll wait as more folks kind of hop back in, and we'll get started again. Okay, everyone is back. I hope everyone had some fruitful conversations in their breakout rooms. We'll now get started. We'll kind of go by turn, and every single representative or representatives from each group will have a chance to share what was discussed and action items discussed in their group. So we'll begin with group one, where the co-facilitators were Jasmine and Bella. So group one, take it away.
Yes, so in our group, we talked a bit about the guiding question, which is what are the short, midterm, and long ways that recommendations can be implemented. So with the bargaining that was specifically noted, that would be a mid-range goal, and short-term, hire can be authorized at any time and prioritize our budget, and it would reflect this as a priority. And the school board can also agendize this. For the mid-range, we can start bargaining at any time and specialize what counselors and psych can do. And then with step one, there was also concerns regarding the language and perhaps making it more specific to American high school, since we did take some of our data from other school communities such as Oakland. So maybe revising that a bit. And then also we touched a bit about American high school specifically, which has the largest student body in all of FUSD, but we only have 4 counselors. So we talked about how to make that more equitable a bit, and just try to make sure that students have the support that they need, because also recently there was a group of juniors, one of which who's in this call, they organized this great survey that was sent out to the entire school. And then there was around 800 results, and approximately almost 50% of students stated that they had poor mental health, so they ranked like a 4 or a 5, while only 19% said that they were doing okay. So we talked a bit about that as well.
Perfect. We'll move on to group two. The co-facilitators were Samantha and Ashwarya.
Hi, everyone. So for our group, we specifically talked about the funding for mental health. So just to give some context, so the district planned on removing SROs in the previous meeting, but they are now thinking about reinstating SROs on the 20th. And we were actually planning on using the funding from the SROs for mental health, specifically $838,000. So we specifically talked about how mental health practices are functioned on different campuses for schools. So for example, American has only college counselors. Meanwhile, MSJ has the option to go talk to mental health professionals. And we also talked a lot about the safety concerns. So we talked about, the perspective from the parents to the students about the safety concern for SROs. So we kind of saw this similar trend of how parents usually think SROs are for protection, and students have different opinions on that, in which they think it more or less invites some fear into the student body. And then we also talked about racial inequities. So we talked about racial inequities specifically at JFK. So for the concern of safety, if we have better mental health resources, then the need for SROs will go down. Additionally, we talked about how the effectiveness of SROs are not seen as much on campus. So usually a lot of people, specifically parents, think that SROs are designed to kind of protect us and designed to, provide disciplinary action, but in reality, it just punishes the students. And typically our relationships are kind of hurt by the SROs on campus. So we talked about preventative measures instead of reactionary measures, which is what Ian brought up. And it's a very good point of how these kind of reactionary measures, such as the SROs, really fear mongers the student body. And we think that preventative measures such as mental health practices, such with the MTSS model, would provide much more benefits for the students itself, just for their mental health and just for the safety of the campus. We also talked more about understanding the perspective between students and parents. So there is this kind of polarizing views of how parents view obviously SROs as like, they're just good for the student body, and students tend to more likely support mental health resources rather than SROs. And we wanted to see how we can kind of unify that into a community effort and just to understand each other's perspectives. So we thought about educating parents and families specifically about models such as MTSS and how it can actually benefit our community. So again, like providing more mental health resources at school and how we wouldn't need SROs in the first place if we did have more mental health resources. And yeah, the whole idea of unification is what we also kind of generalized, what we kind of also supported on. And we also talked about funding more wellness centers. So overall, we had a very, very productive discussion. And I think one of the most important parts is just understanding everybody's perspective on mental health, because there are obviously a lot of different opinions, especially with the involvement of the SRO budgeting. But I think it's really important to understand that this is a community effort rather than a single person doing the job. So yeah, I think this was a very informative and productive discussion.
Perfect. We'll move on to group 3. The co-facilitators were Glynis and Coven.
Hey, so I guess we'll go through a quick summary of what was said during this breakout room. I think the first thing I was mentioned is building an asset inventory, just keeping account of what goes on, having some sort of accountability, and that's always key to managing mental health resources. Another thing that was more local to or specific to a school was in Mission San Jose, there was a committee to address microaggressions. And we discussed the effect of microaggressions on mental health, especially in regards to the MSJ students. So there was like a recommendation for FUSD to adopt a similar approach district-wide. Not just for MSJ and AHS and other schools which are implementing the program separately. Then we had another proposal. We saw a lot of support for the recommendations that were just listed in this presentation. Teachers and parents of this community really see students as key and essential, and anything that prioritizes them with regards to mental health, makes their job easier, makes their job worth it in some instances, instances of parents. And one key policy discussion we had was about parcel taxes, and the necessity of that for funding mental health in Fremont schools. Often an issue in the sort of discussion of providing mental health is not having enough funds. So finding ways and looking to examples of, for example, San Francisco's implementation of larger parcel taxes to pay for, very diverse staff of teachers, goes a long way to creating like a healthier community here in Fremont. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Back to you, Alvin.
Perfect. Next up, group 4, we have Drishti, Benjamin, and Lakshmi.
So just like group 3, we had a pretty diverse discussion about funding and the ways that we're able to get money for all of these recommendations that we talked about. One big thing was about communication, how especially during COVID-19, it's harder to communicate within the groups, within all of these education organizations and student-led groups. So it's important to communicate so that we stay consistent in our goals. We also talked about how the majority of the budget within FUSD is going to salaries and benefits. So it's difficult to ask districts and specifically FUSD for money in order to implement all these recommendations that we're talking about. So we also talked about how it's important to map out the fiscal planning behind these implementations and discuss new ways to increase revenue for the reprioritization of funding. And just like group 3, we talked about the parcel tax and how after Prop 15 failed, it's really important for us to have our constituents have budget literacy and how creating a budget from the constituency is really, really important. So it's important to advocate for things like the parcel tax and find ways that we're able to find ways to get money for all of these recommendations. And one big thing is to educate parents and citizens who are going to be voting in 2022 and have them be literate in the budgets that that are going on in California. So the best way to get people to support the parcel tax is to educate parents and the committee. And I think Assemblymember Lee can talk a little bit more about how the budget committee on a state level is working towards digesting this info.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Alex Lee. I'm the Assembly member for the 25th Assembly District. I sit on the Education Policy Committee and Budget Subcommittee for Education. And a goal of the Assembly Democrats right now is to make sure that our schools have the funding they need to survive, obviously, the school whole pandemic right now. It's going to be an ongoing struggle to make sure that there is enough money for all the schools, especially now, but to make sure that we fulfill the promise of making sure the schools are funded even after the pandemic. So we are obviously going to be working on efforts to, hopefully, that's my goal, to have another type Prop 15 measure to increase the pie of revenue. But locally, a parcel tax is very, very important because locally you can make the case that we need the money for our students, our families. And it also warms up, obviously, the community to a grander idea of a tax increase or new revenue for schools across the state. So that's why it's so important. But in the meantime, our office is going to do what we can, digest and figure out all the new revenue sources that hopefully we will come up with and the new ways to reprioritize our state budget, especially during this pandemic recession. But we will be doing that really soon, this month, actually.
Perfect. Moving on to group 5, Jenny and Kenneth.
Yeah, so what we talked about mainly was about how we should share the information that we talked about in this discussion about like the statistics from Irvington and stuff like that more widely, because a lot of us had not heard stuff about that before. So we thought that ways we could do this is obviously social media for like the students, and loop messages and like emails and groups and email groups and stuff like that for the parents and other people in the community. And then also we talked about how at Miss Applegren's school, she said that they have like a parent nights for people, like parents to come and hear about things about their mental health and stuff. So we talked about that, how we can make that wider to everyone at the high school level too, how we can have like parent nights with presentations and stuff like that for parents to be more acquainted with what's happening. And then also we talked about how we could partner with the city of Fremont to share the resources to get more information out through their channels as well. And also how we need to pressure on the state leaders to have more funding for our schools in general, which obviously none of this will happen without money. So the way we talked about that was we need more funding from the state, as a lot of the money at FUC is already being used up. And finally, we talked about how it's important to not forget about elementary school students in our discussions as well. As obviously with COVID, they're under a lot more stress while being at home. So that's one thing that we don't want to forget about either.
And for the last group, we'll end with the principals. So Mr. Evans and Mrs. Barrington.
Thank you. On on behalf of the principals, we want to thank the students and the professional health care community for putting this together. We look at the recommendations, we see that a lot of these are not only doable, but we're doing certain aspects of them in our schools. So that's great to see. We totally agree that more professionals on site to help with mental health services would be great. That would be negotiated sort of outside of our schools. So what we focused on was on our school site and how we can help students directly and virtually. As noted, we have the mental health centers that are being created, the wellness centers. But how do we do that when we're working remotely? We've noticed that our referrals to counselors have gone down during this time. How do we reach out to kids and hear back from kids when we're from a distance? And that creates its own challenges. So our counselors are working on that. Our administrators are working on that to support students. We agree that restorative practices need to develop more. We've had training on that. It's a very involved process for a restorative circle. We need to push that training out more to all of our staff. So not only can we do the larger restorative circles, but we can do more on the spot training and practices as well. And then also looking at our tier 1 community building is something that we're focused on, pushing out information, getting newsletters out to community, as Amelia said, having parent presentation nights, making sure that parents and students are aware of all the resources that are provided for them.
Okay, now that all the groups have shared, we're now going to move on to kind of open discussion. So if any individual wants to share their thoughts or ideas or suggestions or even questions that they'd like to ask, feel free to just use the raise hand function on Zoom. And to do that, you just go to participants and there should be a raise hand function at the bottom. So we'll begin with Priya.
Can you hear me? Thank you. My name is Priya and I graduated from Mission in 2019 and I'm currently representing the FUSD Alum Association. I'd really like to thank all the stakeholder groups for taking time out of your holiday to be part of this conversation, because this is just such an important issue to this community. And the decisions that affect students in our schools certainly aren't made in silos. We really set our priorities as a school district, as a city, and as a community. And we all really feel and live with the consequences of these priorities that we're setting. And I think it's really important for us to start thinking of mental health and mental well-being in a more holistic way. It's not just the absence of a mental illness, it's also our social, emotional, and behavioral health, our resiliency, and our ability to cope with life's challenges. As I mentioned, I graduated from Mission not very long ago, 2 years ago, and I will say that students are not always safe, and some of the ways that students cope with their environment can be really dangerous and potentially life-threatening. And in the span of 4 years while I was a student, we lost 2 of my peers to suicide. And I know we did our best as a community, but we just didn't have the resources to really move forward, to have a postvention. We didn't have a conversation like this really to discuss how we could all work together across the stakeholder groups to support students. So certainly student mental health was already a growing concern before all of the challenges that were brought upon us by the pandemic. And there's clearly a great need for more racially diverse and culturally competent support staff. Of course, our school district has to make $30 million of budget cuts over the next 2 years. If the district decides to put a parcel tax on the ballot for 2022, I think it'll be really important, as it was mentioned before, to spend a year educating the community, build greater budget literacy, spread awareness for this huge unmet need. And the recent budget town halls and this mental health town hall, I think, are really, really great steps. I don't think that this district has ever had campaigning for a parcel tax that was done through constituency groups. And I think that's also something that we can consider. And I know FUSD Alum Association would be more than willing to engage in that. And also I'd like to say that it's really critical that these efforts are approached with a racial equity lens, with an emphasis on cultural awareness, because for many communities of color, there's a strong resistance against thinking of mental health and mental illness in the same way as a traditional medical illness. And sometimes seeking help is seen as a weakness. Because we have such a large API community, I would be remiss not to mention that out of all of the ethnic groups, Asian Pacific Islander API students who are diagnosed with mental illness are the least likely to seek or receive treatment. And there's a huge pressure to live up to the model minority stereotype. Discussing mental health is considered taboo in many Asian cultures. And as a result, a lot of Asian American students tend to dismiss or deny their symptoms. And the model minority stereotype not only harms the mental well-being of Asian American students, but it harms all students, especially Black and Latinx students who don't benefit from being a model. So these are things to be aware of to ensure that all students truly feel supported by any changes that we make, and that we don't fall back on scapegoating or blaming families for these issues of mental health. And finally, I want to say that as a school district, we really pride ourselves in how excellent our students are, but we don't necessarily give them a seat at the table. And I think it's really important to start centering and empowering students and letting them have a say in the decisions that are affecting them and their classmates. So thank you so much again to everyone for being here, and I really look forward to what's to come from this discussion. Thank you.
Next up, Andrea.
Hi, so hopefully you guys can hear me. Two things. So one thing is the proposal that is on here, it's really productive to society in general, but since it kind of centers around the kids and the schools and everything like that, it's natural to want to approach parents, students, people who advocate for parents and students, but at the same time, it's productive to society in general. So when you're thinking about funding and things like that, things like parcel taxes and stuff like that, there are a lot of people who tend to vote no on things like that simply because they don't have kids in the school district. And the reality is these things are productive to them too. So because everybody has to share society with people who have been through different types of schooling. And so are we making efforts to get on board with people who don't have kids, people who are business owners, people who are still invested but may not be aware of the gravity of the need of the proposal. So that's my question. Anyway.
Next up, Zion.
Yeah, thank you. So a couple of things. First, I really like I think it was the fourth recommendation where it was all about accountability. I think accountability in this situation is extremely important because as we saw today and just in general, there's a lot of things that need to get done in FUST to address this issue. And a strong accountability system and making sure that everyone is involved and having their voices heard, especially the students, will definitely make this go a lot better. Next, in terms of counseling, so there's been a lot of discussion today about like getting students access to counselors, which is definitely extremely important. But I'd also like to see once students do actually get that opportunity, what is their experience? Do they enjoy it? Because personally, I've heard a lot of his stories where a student sees a counselor for mental health reasons and doesn't really help, or in some cases it may make it worse. So definitely training in that situation for counselors to making sure that situations are dealt with correctly, and in general like accountability in that sense. And then lastly, this is something kind of separate from what's been discussed today, but something that Surf 4D has been kind of researching are mental health days, which is kind of in two categories, where one category is excused absences for mental health days. And I think this would really help with the culture shifts that needs to happen in FUSD, and also just really legitimize the issue of mental health and delegitimize the stigma. And then the other are designated mental health days. So in March and October, those 2 months, there are no breaks for students, like no Monday breaks or holidays or things like that. And, something that we're seeing a lot right now and happens every year is burnout, where it's just like so much work and it piles up, or, it's just a lot of stress. And I feel like, just one Monday or one Friday break would really make a huge difference for some kids in those months, especially, when, there's just so much going on. So those are some two things that I think would really help out in our district, and something to be looked into. Thank you.
Christy?
Yeah, I had a question for the trustees and the Board of Education, whoever here is in attendance that can speak on this. I know we talked about how earlier a lot of the funding that is spent within FUSD is towards salaries and benefits. So in an environment where there's a lot of budget cuts, what can the trustees do towards committing to making sure that mental health is a first class priority?
Since a trustee is going to be called on later, we'll give Trustee Prasad an opportunity to address that point as well when he's called on. Next up, Teresa.
Okay, yeah, so I just want to applaud and thank everyone for organizing and researching on this subject and your advocacy for mental health support. I fully support your effort here, and I'm actually a parent of two boys on the autism spectrum and in the special education program at this school district. And my older boy is entering junior high, and he's already been, talking to me about how anxious he is about going into junior high next year, and the fact that there is, not like wellness center, at the junior high campuses right now, and like enough school counselors. It's very concerning to me as a parent, and just in general how our the numbers of staffing that we have for school counselors, psychologists, or nurses are like very lacking. And I really appreciate you guys speaking up on what is important to you guys, and wanting to have like a cultural change across the board, systemic support for your peers, right? And I also appreciate Assembly Member Lee reaching out and getting those funding for us for our school district. Thank you.
Next up, Irshad.
Yeah, thanks, Alvin. Always a pleasure in all your webinars. Quick comments. If you go back and look at the very first webinar we had on mental health, it was all about microaggression and how microaggression was a major issue. And if I remember correctly, at that time, there was a lot of concern about lack of accountability and lack of support for the students and the parents and families on to addressing those issues. Mission Possible, MPPFA, and Mission San Jose High School has taken that up very seriously, and we have created a parent advocacy committee that I would like to see being reflected in all the schools. But most importantly, I think it's the time to address the microaggression and the issues associated with it, to have an ombudsperson both at the district and every school that is funded by the FUSD to advocate and support and help the parents when the students are feeling the pressure. I think that has not been addressed, and it's a huge lack. And I would also urge the leaders of the leadership of FUSD to sunshine the complaint process, to simplify it as part of their negotiation for the upcoming negotiations. And try to simplify it and provide some relief for the parents and students who have gone through this process and are not feeling supported. I think it's a huge gap that has not been addressed so far, and I'd like to highlight that to be addressed in future.
Next up, Rosemond.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here today on this Sunday, and Happy New Year to everyone as well. I just want to make a few comments about the ways that we can more actively involve students in the decision-making process for these mental health practices. I think a great first step would be involving students by having some sort of system of accountability to ensure that there's a way that our gathered student input on these mental health reform ideas can be taken into account into the decision-making process on the school board level, as well as on the more long-term perspective, giving a voice to the student board member and having like an actual vote that would count as not simply like symbolic, but more counting towards decision-making perspectives on the school board. I also wanted to reiterate and support the multi-tiered system of supports. With this type of proactive prevention system, we're able to address and meet the needs of students from all different backgrounds, especially those who have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, such as like students with disabilities and homeless youth and English learners as well. And I also just want to mention that in our breakout group, Trustee Campbell mentioned how current therapists at the high school level are trained to do social emotional learning for students, but that their students might not necessarily understand that or know that that is an option. And so I think that just will go to show that we need these wellness centers and peer resource centers more than ever to help have more educational outreach towards the student body about the capabilities of therapists, as well as the need for, again, more therapists and counselors for the school districts. for schools across the school district. So once again, thank you so much to GENup for hosting these town halls, and really looking forward to working together with everyone to make this a reality.
Next up is Shoria.
Hi everyone, I'm a Washington senior and I specifically wanted to talk about the issue between parents and students. So I'm really thankful for our breakout room because I'm really thankful for perspectives from the PTSA, specifically Priya. She brought in a new perspective that I haven't thought of before, where parents tend to think differently than students in terms of protecting their own children. So they usually think of these SROs as like they will protect them from violence on campus. And I think there's a lack of understanding between both parents and students. If anybody attended I think it was like in December, the board meeting in December, there was a lot of controversial issues between SROs and mental health. So as you can tell, a lot of the parents were in support of SROs and a lot of the students were more in support of mental health funding instead of SRO funding. And I think it's really important for us to directly communicate with parents. Usually with these events, we see a lot of direct communication with faculty and direct communication with, for example, FATA or with board members, but we barely see any communication with parents itself. And I think it's really important to talk to them as well, since they are community members. And I was thinking we could maybe specifically host a type of system or event where we can directly communicate with parents. As you can see, they also have a lot of opinions on SROs and mental health funding in general. And I'm really thankful that Priya brought up the discussion of how usually with parents, we don't communicate what these mental health systems entail. So I was thinking it can be like an educational webinar or just like an educational platform where we discuss mental health models such as MTSS and more institutions such as social emotional learning at schools. And that's what I wanted to say. Again, I want to thank PTSA for coming here, because thank you for enlightening me on those issues, because I think that's really important to discuss.
Tushar?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo all of the district-wide recommendations that we've made throughout this entire discussion. But also for all of the viewers watching, it's important to remember that something you can do right now is in general just looking out for your community and your peers, because as we've heard, mental health is deteriorating right now with distance learning, but also at the same time, referrals to counselors are going down. So we just want to make sure that we're looking out for each other and in general being resilient as an entire community. And I want to thank everyone here for putting this together and all of the viewers for really prioritizing mental health. Thank you.
Jazz?
Thank you. And I'm so appreciative of Ms. King bringing up her children with special needs. That is very important as well. And I think some of the things that we need to do as we look as a community and staying together is finding ways to foster those relationships with our neighbors. So I really want to seek for us to be able to find ways for students that have special needs to be able to stay in their own home community, home school, and receive the services that they need and supports. Part of mental health is really knowing the community around you. And it's important that they have an opportunity and an option to be part of or rostered into gen ed classrooms for not only social emotional, but for academic learning purposes. And I'm really thankful for everyone bringing up a parcel tax. I feel like the community is a very empathetic one, and we all want to support each other. And I feel like the community would definitely be in favor if we were looking towards supporting these issues with the parcel tax. Thank you so much.
And to conclude, Trustee Prasad.
Hey, so, well, Happy New Year, and thanks, GENup, for organizing this. I mean, this is, to me, mental health is a journey, right? It's not an event. And just like physical health has focused right from preschool or kindergarten at least, we need to create an environment where the stigma is removed and it becomes part of the curriculum so that you can identify and create awareness right from the beginning. So as we do that, I mean, one of the things somebody mentioned here is that there's a lot of finger pointing, the people pointing at unnecessary pressures from parents or unnecessary competition in classroom. There's a lot of finger pointing that could happen, but we need to be in solution space, and that's where if we can get to that point, I see it as a two-dimensional problem, right? You have identification and awareness, and we talk about the step 1, 2, 3, and 4, but they could apply to each of those the phases of, let's say, mental health deterioration over time. And a lot of action items can come out of that. I can't commit on behalf of the entire board here. However, I can say that for me, mental health is front and center, right? One of the students that has been mentioned that committed suicide used to sit next to my son when he was at Mission San Jose High School, right? And one day she was gone. So it is near and dear to my heart. So we definitely want to get there. But if I look at there are many facets to mental health. Only a few have been discussed here, right? And creating a well-rounded student that has curriculum as well as extracurricular activities blended in, and also the definition of each student's success being individualized will drive that sense of achievement and success in each student's mind. And I was just looking at a TED talk right before this. It happened to show up on my LinkedIn, and there was some research that was happening at West Point Academy and various other places, even spelling bee contests. What type of kids actually succeed? And the answer was the kids that have the grit to actually duke it out and get to the other end successfully. So that requires a lot of different parameters, and one of those is passion. And passion, it comes from within, right? And as the school community, we need to make it so that kids are able to see that their passion will be something that people see as their success. And then a lot of these stress levels can go down, and we can make a lot more progress. So what I can say is that as we look at this together, I mean, it's great to have a set of recommendations from here. Let's bring the experts. Let's take the baby steps. Let's work like what in one of the breakouts Victoria said. Let's get to the bargaining. Let's do every little step that can be taken, and it'll be a journey. But we are all in it together, and together we'll succeed. So thanks for organizing.
And with that, we'll move on to the next steps and close this space. But I just want to say again, on behalf of all the student organizers here today, thank you so much to all the community stakeholders for gathering. It means a lot, I think, to the students being able to see the power of not only our voice in action, but how receptive our kind of elected leaders and public leaders and the adults we kind of look up to guidance in our education system are supportive of our asks. If there seems to be a lot of broad level consensus on a lot of our recommendations today, and if you kind of support the recommendations we've discussed, we would love if you could sign on to our petition at bit.ly/FUSD-strong that has just been signed to the Zoom chat, and we look forward to seeing your public support soon. And we really look forward to working with you all to really move forward and get some of these recommendations implemented, like Trustee Prasad was saying. I see that Assemblymember Lee has raised his hand, so I'll call on you, Assemblymember Lee, real quick.
Hey, Alvin, sorry, I know you wanted to move on, but I'll just say something really quick from hearing everyone's discussion points is, first I want to say it's an incredible job, GENup, and all the students and all the alumni for convening everyone. I will say, because I do represent 2 counties, it is very, very rare for young people, especially current students, to be the ones in the convening space, to be setting the agenda, and it is so important and impactful to be hearing from the people that we wish to serve, right? When everyone who's elected in elected office or school boards or anything say they want to serve the students, they want to serve the community, that's you. You are literally giving voice to the people that will come, to school and generations after you, currently with you, and it is so important to be listening to it. So I think as an elected official and someone elected this time, it's so I don't know, heartening or authentic to just feel that I can hear all your recommendations. They're so thoughtful and they're so well put out together. I think it's imperative that everyone in our community listen to them thoroughly and try to figure out how do we accomplish these things, because at the end of the day, you are the folks that we are trying to serve, right? The folks that are going to these schools and everyone that's going to come after. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a short-term thing, but I think it's so important to be listening to it, because another big thing we kind of talked about, right, is the lack of money to do these things, right? With Proposition 15 failing, that was a huge blow to us, where it almost narrowly passed. Literally, if a couple people more in Fremont even maybe voted for it, it could have passed. So it is so important that these local conversations are happening and that we stand up for these schools and we really put our money where our mouth is, right? Because, and look, you can hold me accountable to that too. And what's important is that, you need to be pressuring everyone in our community to make sure that we're putting our money where our mouth is, because it's so important to realizing these things. And I'll be fighting with you each and every day to do that. And I'm really, really glad that you're all staying engaged and rallying everyone, because again, it's super impressive, super rare. And I hope you continue doing this. I'm gonna hopefully encourage other student associations in my other cities to do the same thing. So awesome, thank you again. I'll let Alvin move on. I don't wanna hold up too much time.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for those kind words, Assemblymember Lee. And on behalf of all the students, thank you so much for your commitment and support for student leadership and student voice in our education system. It means a lot. So sending lots of love and energy over this virtual screen to you and all the adult stakeholders and student community stakeholders gathered here today. So, we discussed a lot, and just to really close the space, I think these are a good summary of kind of the next step action items to move forward to make sure some of these recommendations are implemented or there's action taken on these, seeing as there seems to be a lot of broad stakeholder support and agreement on a lot of these recommendations that were proposed today. So the first one is continued engagement with the community. So on the January 6th board meeting, it would be great if the trustees could potentially agendize a discussion on mental health at the January 20th board meeting, particularly to discuss some of these recommendations and action items that we talked today. And we'd be happy again to meet with the board trustees prior to these meetings to figure out the specifics of this. But again, this is an important priority to the community, and only discussing it at the retreat is really not accessible to the community at large. So a broad, open community discussion where we can get a lot of community input, I think, will be really important in terms of moving forward both inclusively and collaboratively. The second one is continued conversations and town halls on mental health, just like the ones we've hosted now and all the ones that the various ASBs and GENup Fremont hosted back during the summer with the microaggressions and mental health panels. Number two is funding. So secure both our own funding at the local level, kind of through continued stakeholder engagement, specifically collaborating on the parcel tax campaign. Three, to really empower kind of student voice and voices of mental health professionals when making decisions and involving really all stakeholder groups. So specifically implementing steps 3 and 4 of the recommendations and kind of work collaboratively and commit to gradually implementing steps 2 and 3. And again, a lot of these are very much feasible, as the principals here today shared, a lot of pieces of these recommendations that we proposed today, they're already doing at a school site level. So there's model precedent and examples to show that these are doable and these are achievable. And obviously the last one would be to sign the petition at bit.ly/FUSD strong for everyone here watching today. But those are the summaries of the next steps. Once again, thank you all to all the mental health professionals, the trustees, state legislatures, our elected officials. Thank you all for gathering here today and really showing the power of student voice and really making change in our education system. We look forward again to working with you all and the district to really move forward and implement and address these concerns and really get these recommendations going. So on behalf of all students that helped organize this, thank you so much again. And on behalf of all the student stakeholders gathered here today, we are so excited to work with you all to make some concrete changes in our community. So thank you for being here. And on that note, I guess town hall adjourned, to pretend I have like a fake gavel. Thank you all.